Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started for the benefit of everyone who tuned in on time. Again, my name is Ab Ream. I'm with the Federal Energy Management Program, and today's webinar has been set up so that we can present a concept to ESCOs we call Enable, and what we're trying to do is provide a method for mass-scale financing for federal water, energy, and sustainability projects. Can everybody see the slides okay? Let's see, mine's cut off. How do I get rid of it? Okay. First, I'd like to just talk about why we're doing this. Over the past, and many of you out there have been involved with the ESPC program for quite some time, and so I think you know that there's increasing need for help getting projects financed and getting them in the ground at federal facilities. And what's happening is that over the years, as you all probably know, the requirements for federal facilities to become more energy efficient, to reduce their greenhouse gases, to become more water efficient, to become more sustainable and greener, all of those requirements just keep ratcheting up every time another executive order, another piece of legislation comes out. And we don't see that changing. We see that trend continuing in the future, and I wouldn't be surprised there are more executive orders and legislation coming out over the next 3 or 4 years that even increases the requirements beyond where they are right now. When we look at the ESA, the Energy Independence and Security Act that was passed a few years ago, all the requirements in the ESA put a big burden on federal facility managers to get a lot of projects done. One of the things that ESA requires is that we audit all what they call covered federal facilities, and those are facilities that consume 75% of your energy at a given facility. And just a back of the envelope calculation tells us that there's probably about 100,000 buildings in that category, roughly 75-25 rule. So about 100,000 federal buildings consume 75% of our energy. If we have to audit them every 4 years, we're doing 20 or 25,000 buildings a year, and that is just going to continue to add to the backlog of projects that we already have right now. And the problem we're facing is that we have a tremendous backlog of unfunded projects right now going into a pipeline that is very constricted, and not much coming out the other end of the pipeline in terms of completed projects and realized energy savings. FEMP estimates that we need to invest about somewhere around the order of $1 billion a year going forward just to keep up with existing energy reduction targets. We feel that the vast majority of ECMs that are being identified by audits today and in the future are not being funded by any appropriations or any other means, and so that leaves us kind of stuck behind the 8 ball. The potential market for Enable, we're looking at the database of federal buildings. There are roughly close to 400,000 federal buildings in this database, the Federal Site Building Characteristics Database. When you look at the sizes of these buildings, 99.8% of these buildings are under 200,000 square feet. And these are buildings that, generally speaking, don't have central plant kinds of issues, and they don't have, many of them don't have any energy management control systems. They're pretty straightforward buildings. But these buildings tend to be the ones who get overlooked when it comes to ESPC or UEFC. We see that those types of contracts are moving more towards larger projects, more complex, more broad-scale projects. And these smaller facilities tend to be not invited to that party. So can I get rid of this box right here? When I click that, it moves to the other side. Bear with me for a second. Well, I'll work around it, I guess. Okay, sorry about that. I have a box that I can't get rid of on the computer screen here. That probably is not visible out there, though. Okay. So the potential market, we're looking at a total of about 3 billion square feet of federal building space, and these are spread out over about 15,000 sites and about 380,000, 400,000 buildings. We used to use a number of 500,000, but I think it shrank a bit over the last 10 years. And out of that 3 billion square feet, there are some fairly large campuses. We found 244 large federal campuses over 3 million square feet, and that encompasses about 250,000 buildings and about 1.7 billion square feet altogether. Now, we see that as probably the more likely target for ESPCs, but certainly I don't think ESPCs, the way we're moving them now, it doesn't seem like we're going to be able to handle that whole market with the ESPCs alone unless something radical happens in the way ESPCs are, we have to change the process and really streamline the process. So we would say that the larger percentage of those larger sites are probably also in the market for something like Enable. So we're left with about 130,000 buildings, totaling about 1.5 billion square feet, that might be the most likely target for a streamlined approach to energy project development and financing, plus perhaps another, and my slide is being partially hidden, plus another close to 1 billion square feet in those larger campuses that may not be served by ESPC or UESC. If you go to the chart on slide 8, we just try to give a range of opportunity for the market for streamlined, mass-scale, smaller projects. And we're looking at from a low range. How do I go back? So you look at the low range of about 1.5 billion square feet of building space, average annual energy cost of about $1.50 a square foot. If our target is 10% annual energy savings, that means we have a potential energy savings of about $2.25 billion. If we look at a 5-year payback for those investments, and there's probably a $1.125 billion investment. I'm sorry, the annual savings is $225 million. Looking on the other end of the scale, on the higher range, if we look at that 2.35 billion square feet, average cost per square foot of about $2. We're looking at energy cost in the $4.7 billion range. If we're targeting 20% savings, we have a potential to save nearly $1 billion. If you're shooting for a maximum of a 10-year payback, that opens it up to a lot more projects and a lot more investment. So the investment needed would be on the order of $9.4 billion. These are pretty broad swags, but it gives you an idea as to the potential range of opportunity. But where's the money? And that's the question we all face. Under the existing and certainly in the future, the political and the budget climate is pretty tight. Investments for energy and water projects most likely are not going to be coming at the rate that they have been coming, and most likely all those funds are going to be going down. So we can't count on appropriations to get this work done. So how to comply with all these mandates and capture all this opportunity? So we have existing options. ESPC, of course, is one of them. We've been working on ESPCs for a long time, and many of you out there are part of the contract or on that contract right now. But as we found out over the last 10 or 15 years, the process of development is long, and it's not for everybody. And you might be able to get one through in 6 or 9 months, but most likely it's going to take 18 months, 2 years, even 3 years or more to get these projects in the ground. And the numbers of projects also do not reflect the market potential out there. So the other thing we've heard about ESPCs, and this is coming from the ESCOs themselves, is that the expense of doing a small ESPC at small buildings is still pretty high, and they seem to prefer going for the bigger projects because of the expense and the time involved. So the smaller projects tend to get not necessarily ignored, but they're not being pursued. Agencies with limited staff, limited contracting officer experience are not really well positioned to enter into the ESPC market either. So the small ESPCs, even though they're smaller and they're simpler, they should be easier to do under ESPCs, but the experience shows that they're not necessarily any faster than the large ESPCs. Utility energy service contracts are also an option, but it's a somewhat limited basis, and not every utility across the country offers these. I'm not sure what the number is now. Last time I checked, it was about 35 or 40 utilities that are actually actively involved in providing financing for federal projects. So they don't cover the entire market, but where they are available, they seem to be less complicated. They don't have the stringent guarantee and M&V requirements that ESPCs have, and they're definitely an option, but again, not on that mass producible scale. Power purchase agreements, many of you I'm sure have heard of these, but again, they're becoming more popular, but they're aimed primarily at on-site generation of renewable energy, where a third party builds the infrastructure, and then the federal agency buys back the power at some predetermined rate. So they have limited application, and they're not exactly they're not as widespread as many people might think. And the same thing with enhanced use leases. We hear a lot about them, but there's really only a handful of them in place across the board in the federal government. And again, these are complicated and very site-specific, and they're not something that we see as mass-producible across the federal government. There's a couple other means of finding financing. Some state programs, utilities are still offering incentives and rebates, but again, kind of limited in nature, and they don't even touch the need on the mass federal scale. Utilities have offered quite a bit of benefits, over $3 billion in tax and incentives, and about $500 million for demand response programs. They do offer rebates for lighting and heating, HVAC control systems, and they do offer reduced costs for a lot of different energy efficiency technologies and water conservation efforts. So they're good if you have one in your backyard, but they're not available to everybody. State benefits, there's a number of states that have their own programs. Texas, Pennsylvania has one. Up in New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, there are programs you can take advantage of. NYSERDA has programs. A lot of them are more focused on residential than commercial or government type buildings. And they are somewhat sporadic, and they're not really intended to address the federal mass scale deployments. So, where does that leave us? Here's where we would like to go, the desired state, and this is what we're calling Enable. We'd like to develop a method of project financing that would be targeted to smaller buildings under 200,000 square feet, and or projects under $500,000 capital investment, and that would not include finance costs. And we would probably want to exclude projects in the larger campuses over 3 million square feet, because we think that they would be better candidates for ESPC or UESC. Those large campuses probably require a lot more integrated solution, a lot of design, and probably would require a lot more M&V. So we're looking at the smaller, simpler, mass-producible types of projects. We'd like to provide a highly streamlined and automated process that leads to project construction starts within 3 to 6 months of initiation. And we'd like to predefine a select category of pretty straightforward projects, including retrofits, repairs, and replacements, and existing building commissioning and O&M opportunities with simple paybacks under 10 years. We know there's a lot of commissioning and O&M potential out there that has paybacks sometimes well under 1 year, which would be really great to provide a method of financing those. All these projects, of course, would have to be attractive to financiers on a pretty wide scale. We've talked to a few of them, and they like the idea. They don't see why they would not want to invest in these types of projects as long as they had, aggregate numbers that would be attractive enough for competitive financing. One of the things that we would like to do is kind of keep M&V kind of down to a minimum. M&V on energy savings performance contracts can get pretty complicated and expensive, so we're looking at a set of ECMs where you can simplify the M&V considerably. And we'd like to also promote small business participation as well as the larger ESCOs. So we see a lot of benefits if we can develop this kind of approach. We can achieve energy and water savings, which is really what we're all about. We kind of tend to lose focus. What we're trying to do here is save energy and save water and save money. And we're trying to reduce our greenhouse gas reductions as a result of all of that. We think there's a good opportunity for jobs in the small business sector as well as the larger ESCOs. And we feel like we can get a broader participation from ESCOs across the country, both large and small business opportunities. Possible short list of the ECMs that might be appropriate for this kind of approach. We're looking at ECMs that don't require a lot of upfront engineering and design work, or none at all, if there is such a thing. And we're looking at projects that don't require extensive M&V beyond project acceptance. And we realize under the existing statutory authority, there's still a requirement to do some sort of annual check and we're exploring how you might be able to go about doing that without putting too much of a burden on either the ESCO or the federal agency. But some of the projects that come to mind would be lighting and water retrofits, controls, and by controls we're talking about not EMCS or broad scale mass control systems for multiple building campuses, but programmable thermostats, occupancy sensors, motion sensors, daylight sensors, controls on the low end of the scale to that effect. Possibly pump motor replacements, package units. There are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of package rooftop units out there that possibly could fit into this category. Things like vending machine economizers and maybe even storm windows. And certainly I think O&M, building tune-ups, or retro commissioning efforts could probably fit into this category. I'll say that Dr. Unruh, who's the director of FEMP, wants us to focus for the short term on lighting, water retrofits, and control systems. So how do we meet our need to develop these projects? We want to develop a fast-track process for feds to get projects reviewed, approved, and in the ground as quickly as possible. But of course maintaining technical, legal, contractual, and financial integrity. So we need procedures to go directly from an energy audit to funding mechanisms. Ensure that ESA audits and recommendations are implemented as soon as possible, and all of you, I'm sure, are well familiar with the shelf full of energy audits that never goes anywhere. We want to try to prevent that from happening. So if you do an audit, the purpose of doing the audit is to get projects in the ground, not just to do an audit. And we want to make sure that there's a ready source of financing for qualified ESCOs out there. So we're looking at a maximum of a 6-month cycle time from initiation, from the time an agency calls and says, I want to do some projects, I want an audit, or I have an audit already, and I want to get some projects done, to the time they sign a contract with an ESCO. I hear cheers in the background.
Yeah.
Somebody just fell off their chair out there. So, meeting the need, we'd like to see eventually some special consideration for O&M and retro commissioning types of opportunities with simple paybacks, especially when you're under a 1-year time frame. And right now, it's been sort of problematic including them within the ESPC contracting vehicle. We'd like to see some standard procedures developed for common types of ECMs. An automated submittal type of process, and we've been using the TurboTax analogy. If any of you are familiar with TurboTax, and I'm not advertising it, I'm just using it as an example of how a software package can interview you and get information from you, and then help steer you in the right direction based on the answers that you're giving. So we'd like to look at something like that. For lighting, something possibly like the commercial lighting solutions that's been underdeveloped by the DOE Building Technologies program, something like that. We'd like to make sure we're relying on existing statutory authority. The last thing we want to do is go in with new legislative requirements. I think that would take forever to get that done, and I'm not sure that we need them, to be honest with you. I think we have all the pieces in place. We'd like to use existing contracting vehicles, such as the existing ESPC contracts under DOE, as well as Huntsville and anybody else who has one, and other things such as GSA schedule, basic ordering agreements, and area-wide contracts. We did meet with the GSA schedule people, and they feel that their program could help us a lot, and I think we could help them as well. I think there's a lot of people who don't understand how to use GSA schedule, or ESCOs don't understand how to get on GSA schedule. So I think we could probably provide a good synergistic kind of an effort with GSA to help improve the understanding and the use of the GSA schedule. And if needed, and this is kind of a last resort, another IDIQ for small federal sites, projects, and small businesses, but I don't think that's the way we're thinking now. We'd rather not. And we've kicked around the idea of teaming with other organizations such as Small Business Administration to identify and help to guarantee sources of funding. And that's available for any small companies anyway, but perhaps to have them set up a specific program aimed at energy service companies and federal energy projects may be a good thing. And we've had some preliminary discussions with them about that. And make the maximum use of small businesses as we try to incorporate these small projects. So, proposed outcomes continued with the a pre-qualified list of ESCO. I say small business, but any size ESCO, ready and able to assist federal facilities, able to do energy and water audits, to do renewables types of assessments, and complete ECMs, all the way from retrofits and repairs and replacements, all the way up to commissioning and retro commissioning, and even continuous commissioning. And we like this to be a well-defined and highly automated and as simplified as possible process. Like I said before, 6 months or less, so that we can accelerate the path from doing your audit and assessment to getting a project in the ground. And again, we'd like to simplify that M&V strategy as much as possible, but still make sure that we're in compliance with all of the statutory requirements. And we'd like to have a ready source of financing for projects up to $5 million and possibly even backed by the U.S. government via the Small Business Administration. And make that all available online. So if somebody wants to participate in this, they can get online, provide all the information that we need to know, and then we can pass that on to the ESCOs and have them submit their quotes. The timeline we're looking at is fairly short. We'd like to have, at least for those first 3 ECMs, lighting, water, and small building control systems. The timeline is to at least have the framework put together by the end of September of 2011, which is not that far away. So part of that, we've had a couple of meetings so far with some of the federal agencies, and they've expressed a pretty good interest and pretty good level of support for this. We've met with financiers, we've met with our legal people, both here at headquarters and out at our Golden Field office. And so far we haven't seen any obstacles in the way. So today we're talking to the ESCOs, and we'd like to get feedback from you as to how you think this would work. You've seen what our target is and what our desired state is. And so the reason we're talking to you today is to get some feedback from you. We can either do it via the webinar. How's this going to work, Sarah? They give their feedback now, and or
we can do the general questions now, but what we're planning to do is do either basically an interview style where you would call in and speak to you. We would have some preset questions so we get the same feedback from everyone. Or you can actually, if you're in the DC area, come and meet with us in person. But we can do some general questions now.
Okay.
Or at the end of the webinar, rather.
Okay. I do have a little process flow chart that we put together just to describe ideally how the situation would take place. You have a couple of different scenarios where maybe the Fed has already done their audits and they know what they want, or the Fed would like an ESCO to come in and do audits for them and follow through to completion. So on the left-hand side of this chart, on sheet page 22 of the slideshow, the Fed would submit a audit data package, and again, this would be an automated process where they would feed in whatever information is required in order to get an energy audit completed. There would be a little quality assurance, quality control check on the information that was provided by the agency. If it doesn't pass, it goes back and they redo it. If it passes, it goes to the ESCOs. ESCOs would prepare their proposals and bids and potential financing options. We go through a proposal evaluation and selection process, and depending on whether you need an audit, retro commissioning, or a certain set of ECMs, you would go kind of in a different path. When you hit that red triangle, it says audit, RCX, and/or ECM. So the audit would proceed down to the site visit, the audit reports. The ESCO would develop the technical proposal, the bids, and the financing packages. Feds would review that. Now, in here, there's a potential that some agencies have expressed that you might have to recompete that, so that the firm who does the audit isn't necessarily the same firm that does the ECMs. So we have some details to work out on that block. And depending on whether the findings of the audit identified retro commissioning or ECM opportunities, you'll take a different path along there. Same thing with the audits. If there's only a retro commissioning opportunity, you'll go to the site visit and to the retro commissioning report. On the other side, if the Fed already knows what they want, you basically skip the audit process and go straight to the development of the ECMs or the retro commissioning study. So that's kind of a quick look of how it works, how we'd like it to look. There's a heck of a lot of detail within each of these blocks. This is a very broad view of how we'd like this to operate, but it gives you a sense of what we're trying to do. And to be honest, it's not unlike what the process is to develop ESPCs or UESCs. But what we're trying to do is streamline it, kind of simplify it, and see if we can mass produce it. So next step, by the end of September, our boss would like to have a prototype set up based on the 3 ECMs, lighting, water, and controls. And based on the experiences we gain from those, expand to other ECMs as appropriate, and then roll out to federal agencies. And a lot of this rollout would also take place within the existing ESPC contracts. So that's all I have. I went a little bit over my 30 minutes. But at this point, first of all, we'd like to have any questions. If anybody needs any clarification on the slides that I presented today, be happy to try to answer those. And the main purpose for this webinar is to get your feedback on how you feel about how this would work from the ESCO perspective, any aspects of this from the energy audits to the automated process, or the way we're trying to go about this. We're trying to get a reality check from all of you to see if this is something that you would buy into. So at this point, we'll just open it up to any questions or comments that you have.
I was just wondering, is there a possibility I could get a copy of this presentation?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'll be sending out the presentation after the webinar, and I'll also be sending the sheet to sign up for the interview style portion to get more in-depth feedback from these ESCO. Could everyone hear me?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, everybody will get a copy of the slideshow. I can toggle back, I guess, if you want to go back to a specific slide.
Yeah, I was trying to going over the flow chart really quick. If you wouldn't mind going back, I think it's 2 slides or 1 or 2 slides.
Right here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is all proposed and planned, right? It's not necessarily defined as a project.
Yes, right. This is proposed. Right. Subject to improvement.
And we're hoping this is 6 months time period right here.
That's correct. Yes.
Thank you. Well, thanks for the comments. Just thanks for the webinar. It was very informative, and I'm very hopeful and excited about this, and look forward to our next meeting, July 11th.
Okay. Fantastic.
We do have one question that was typed in.
Oh, here's one here. Okay.
Question is, how can we assure that small companies who are traditionally subcontractors to ESCOs are not perceived by the ESCO market as competition? We don't want to bite the hand that feeds us.
Well, that's a good question, and yeah, we certainly don't want to be usurping the large ESCO's market for these types of projects. And if you are a small ESCO that is a subcontractor to a very large ESCO, how to go about that? That's a tough question. I think that's between the two of you. If the large ESCO has expressed that they're just not interested in these smaller projects, then I don't see that as competing. But if the large ESCO has changed its mind and would now be a lot more interested in pursuing this market, particularly since we streamlined the process, then you might have an issue with them. But it's hard for me to say, give a general answer to that.
As a follow-up, do you see the participants of the projects being more of the smaller ESCOs then?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of that.
Sorry, just as a follow-up, then do you see more of the participants for these smaller building projects being from the smaller ESCOs?
That's sort of the way I see it now. There's a tremendous number of small sites and small buildings out there, and unless they can be bundled together into a large enough package, it seems to me that the larger ESCOs, they don't seem to be moving in that direction. Not to say that they wouldn't want to in the future, but there's a tremendous number of small buildings out there that are available for all kinds of small companies.
Right. And with that, as a follow-up, are there big provisions or allowances that you're making available for the smaller ESCOs to participate? Understanding that the resources might not be available as large ESCOs.
I think the competition is open to all, and I don't think it's, if you're saying would it be set aside for small businesses, no. And you're competing for these projects with everybody else.
Not that.
Hey, Ab, I assume.
Hello?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask Ab, I was going to ask a question. So, on these smaller projects, even though they'd have a shorter time frame, I assume, though, there will still be, even though the M&V might be shortened or simplified, still a requirement imposed on the ESCO to still carry the guarantee for the duration, correct?
Well, we're still exploring that, and I guess there's some kind of it depends kinds of statements there. the language in the statutory authority calls for that provision of that guarantee and the annual M&V. So there's still a guarantee in there, but the responsibility for the M&V could be transitioned over to the site. So there's still a sort of a shared responsibility there. But I think the guarantee is still going to have to be there. Let's see what other questions we have. Will the slides be available? Yes. We have a question here. Why can't the same firm do the audit and the ECMs if you follow a design-build methodology for procurement? That's a good question. I think some agencies would prefer to do it that way, but we've had other agencies feel a little uncomfortable with that design-build. And so I think we have to have those options open. If you want to do the design-build option, as long as you do it according to Hoyle, we don't have anything against that. But there are some agencies who make their own judgment calls on this. So it's a partnership. We can't tell them which way is the best way for them to go. They have to make those decisions. Regarding the contract vehicles, you mentioned GSA, BOA, Huntsville. What do you mean by Huntsville? Huntsville, the Army, the U.S. Army has a ESPC contract that they administer out of their Huntsville, Alabama Corps of Engineers office. That's what I mean by Huntsville. Let's see. And just a general question about slides. We will make the slides available to everybody. Let's see. Here's a question. This may be a great time to also address those entities who self-produce water and sewer and are not able to get an ESPC because the commodity costs are perceived as too low. Can we also use this process change as an opportunity to place minimum values on those commodities, such as each 1,000 gallons of water is a minimum of $1.50, to allow many Army bases who self-produce to justify project paybacks? Wow, that's a good question, and that's about all I can say to that. We'll have to look into that. But great question.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so once you go through the interview process and you're approved to do these projects, how are you going to be selected? How is the GSA going to say, okay, we want this ESCO on this job?
Well, under GSA schedule, and I hope I'm getting this right, they're on the best value. So you would select a number of contractors, I think a minimum of 3 from the GSA schedule, and then you select on the basis of best value.
And just to clarify, the interviews is not to be approved to participate. This is just to get more in-depth feedback. It's kind of hard to ask everyone the same question in this type of format. So that's the purpose of the interview.
Okay, so then there's an interview, and then eventually you get approved to do projects, and then you can submit for a project, and then the GSA is collecting simple paybacks, and then they're comparing for the best bang for the buck.
Well, you're referring to the interviews we're doing after the webinar. We're not conducting interviews to qualify ESCOs, and to qualify as a GSA schedule contractor, you need to go through the GSA process to get on the GSA schedule. And we can get that information to you on how to get that done, if you're not on there already.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, we can show you how to go through that process. Let's see. If you are already recognized by DOE as an approved ESCO, are you automatically on the list? I don't think you're automatically on the list. If you're on GSA schedule or you're already on either the Huntsville contract or the DOE contract, then yes. And I think most of those companies that are on the DOE approved list are probably on GSA schedule, but I don't know for sure. I haven't done a cross-check on that. If the program is open to small and large ESCOs, how will you guarantee the projects won't be swallowed up by the large businesses? Will there be projects set aside for small businesses? We don't see it as a set aside at this point, but I think there's probably plenty of business to go around for small and large ESCOs. Let's see. Financiers prefer long-term financing versus short-term financing. Have you already interviewed the financing industry to see how accepting they are to this new program? And yes, we have. We've talked to a number of financiers who work with the ESPC programs, work with Huntsville and with DOE, and they see this as a good opportunity for them. They see that there's enough potential there, and the projects would probably be, financed over a perhaps a 10 to 15 year period, which is which they perceive as pretty favorable. If we were doing projects 1 or 2 or 3 years at a time, I don't think we'd get the same answer. But we're looking at a range of projects with paybacks of 10 years or less, and so I think that would give them enough opportunity. And that's what we've heard back from them. Let's see, other questions. Here's a question. Could a small revolving Fed fund be set up to fund these projects, whereby the savings go back into the federal pool to self-perpetuate the fund? And boy, that's a great idea. We've been talking about that for years, and that would be a good thing, but that would require some funding from Congress to do that. We've seen the language to that effect year after year after year, but it never quite gets it to the appropriations stage. That would be a nice thing to have. So I'd like to see that. But I don't think that's what we're trying to do here. These would be financial arrangements between the ESCOs and the financiers, what we're talking about with Enable. Somebody's got a keyboard right next to their telephones. If you could please mute your phone if you're keyboarding away. Thank you. Let's see. Comment here. Somebody gave me instructions on how to use the, thank you. Okay, here's a question. We think it is great that DOE is working to make ESPC-type projects more streamlined for smaller sites. We would suggest creating a simplified task order and a task order RFP with lots of streamlining type modifications that can be used with the super ESPC contract so that no one needs to reinvent the wheel. We agree with that. We think that there's lots of ways to improve, and we would certainly like to do that. So we're in agreement on that. And that's it. Okay, I think that covers all the questions that we got from everybody at this point. We would like to, if you are interested, have you come in and meet with us briefly on July 11. Is that all day on July 11? We're going to set aside the whole day on July 11 for each of you to come and talk to us. We would like to get your individual feedback, not a big meeting of all of you, but individual one-on-one sessions, sort of like speed dating, you might say, to get your personal feedback on this and your impressions on how you think it should work. how was the process for them to sign up for that?
We will send a follow-up email to this presentation with the slides, with some choices on time slots. They'll be about 30 minutes, and you can choose to either come in to the DC area or call in. And we'll send out further details on that following this presentation.
Okay. Okay, well, that's all the information that I have, and those are the questions. Are there any other last-minute questions anybody would like to pose? Comments? Feedback? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate your interest in this, and we'll be talking to all of you later. Have a great day.